I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark.
I felt tempted to say that for a while. I just decided to go for it today.
You should. Alright. So welcome everyone to Class Chat Witch, who may throw lightning bolts as well.
Yes, you can see our iconic witch, Faya, here, together with her familiar, the
Daji.
fox, Daji.
Yes. Faya, the iconic witch.
Faya commands powerful magic, not through study or devotion to any ideal, but as a vessel or agent for a mysterious, otherworldly patron that even you don't entirely understand. This entity might be a covert divinity, a powerful fae, a manifestation of natural energies, an ancient spirit, or any other mighty supernatural being. But its nature is likely as much a mystery to you as it is to anyone else. Through a special familiar, your patron grants you versatile spells and powerful hexes to use as you see fit, though you're never certain if these gifts will end up serving your patron's larger plan.
That's right. I feel like Faya has a lot of Chevy Nova energy when it comes to, like, not doing well in Spanish-speaking countries, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Poor
probably.
Faya.
Poor Faya. So, when it comes to being a witch, your initial proficiencies are, pretty castery. You're going to be trained in perception, fortitude, and reflex, expert in will, trained in a patron-based skill, and 3 skills plus your int modifier, which is actually pretty darn good because your key ability score is int. Your hit points are 6 plus constitution modifier, not intelligence.
Rexa asked which patron. I don't know if this is intended to be just a joke
I think it's a pun off of which patron.
Or asking which patron Faya has.
I think it's a pun off of which patron.
Fair enough.
Which patron.
I don't remember
which
what Faya's patron is off the top of my head.
Faya definitely has a lot of potential choices for her patron. The power comes from Desna in some way, but commanded animals, and Desna has a lot of other associated things, so there's a lot of possible choices. I think that one of the occult ones, but being based off of Desna, even though there were animals in her backstory, probably makes the most sense.
Cool.
Anyway, attacks trained in simple weapons and unarmed attacks. Defenses untrained in all armor, trained in unarmored defense. Spells trained in a spell attack roll and DC of your spellcasting tradition determined by your first lesson, because witches can learn any type of magic.
Well, Rexa, what are we here for if not to take pun questions
far too
seriously? Yes.
Yes. So, if you're a witch, during combat encounters, you cast spells to change the course of battle, you use magical hexes to hamper enemies, and aid allies, while leveraging more powerful spells to control the battlefield, heal or harm, aided by your extraordinary familiar, brewed potions, and magic items. During social encounters, you provide knowledge on numerous topics, including a variety of magical matters, and you might call upon your patron's magic to charm or deceive others.
While exploring, you remain alert for magical traps and treasures, employing a clever array of spells to overcome obstacles that stand in your way. Your familiar might aid you through its own considerable set of exceptional abilities. In downtime, you brew potions, craft other magical items, or hunt for new spells for your familiar to learn. You might try to learn more about your patron, their aims, or your own powers, and you might seek out the company of other witches for collaboration or community.
As a witch, you might strive to learn more about your patron or familiar, your patron's goals, why they chose to empower you, and how you fit into their plans. You might seek out new sources of magic, like scrolls and spellbooks, to supplement the spells your patron provides, and you might view your familiar as a steadfast ally, dear friend, or a necessary nuisance, depending on its personality.
Others probably wonder about the nature of your patron and the source of your magic, worrying you'll turn on them, or that you unknowingly serve a foul power. Appreciate your ability to aid them with magic, whether you do so by helping them directly or by hampering their adversaries, and take care not to offend you, fearful that you'll place a malicious hex on them if you are angered.
That's right. So, in terms of witches' class features, well, we can see that they get all of the ones that everybody gets, like ancestry and background and initial proficiencies. We're eventually going to get progression that's very, very familiar for spellcasters, with feats at even levels, and class feats at even levels.
Skill increases.
Yep. Magical Fortitude is at 5th level. Expert Spellcaster, as always, at 7th. Lightning Reflex is at 9th. Alertness at 11th, and then they've picked up all of the experts at that point. Weapon Expertise, as for all casters, is at 11th. Defensive Robes at 13th. Weapon Specialization at 13th. Master Spellcaster at 15th, very standard. Their Resolve is at level 17. That's going to be Master at Will, and turn a success to a critical success, and then legendary spellcaster and the 10th level spell slot feature patron's gift at 19. So that's all pretty standard. Let's go back to level 1 because there's some unique stuff in here. So as a witch at first level you get a patron. That's we talked about that in the lore. It's some being that is offering you powers.
Generally a mysterious and distant power where the offer of power comes a lot before you accept the power or gain the power, far before you really understand what the source of the power is.
That's right.
You might think you understand,
but you don't.
Yes.
You get a familiar, which is a super strong one, like the ones that wizards who have the familiar thesis get, that has a lot of extra familiar abilities. And then you wind up with your cantrips and your spells, which are very similar to a wizard, except you have them on your familiar instead of your spellbook. And then your witch spellcasting is a prepared, intelligence-based caster. It's very similar to a wizard. You don't have a specialty school giving you some additional spells, but you do have hexes, which are a focus spells and also a focus cantrip that you get from your patron as well. And you get a Fee's Familiar hex automatically that it costs 1 focus point. That's a focus spell to protect your familiar from harm. So those are very handy.
Because your familiar is pretty important. You don't want the little familiar getting hurt.
Especially if you're like a sprite and you're riding around on your familiar as a corgi. Because mounts can wind up getting attacked more often than a regular familiar does, even if it's not that often.
Fair enough.
Alright, so let's take a look at the patron themes.
Yes.
So there is Curse. That's probably not exact. Feya's maybe Fate actually, but
so these themes are very broad, intended for people to be able to come up with their own stories about what's going on with their patron and to let their patron be a wide variety of entities.
That's right. So if you pick Curse, you're occult, and therefore your skill is occultism. The skill is always going to be the magic skill for that type of magic. You get the Hex Cantrip Evil Eye, and you get the spell Rave Enfeeblement into your familiar automatically. Fate is about Glimpses of the Future, which is also occult, but with Nudge Fate and the True Strike spell. Fervor is Divine with Stoke the Heart and the Command spell. So what these do, Evil Eye is a debuff that can frighten your enemies. Nudge Fate is going to give a bonus when it matters to your friends. Stoke the Heart is going to add some damage to your friends, and it gives Command as the granted spell. Night is occult with the Shroud of Night, so you can make it harder for your opponents to see if they don't have good dark vision, and Sleep spell. Rune, Sigils and Symbols, it's Arcane. You get Discern Secrets, which can allow you to quickly figure some stuff out, and you also get the Magic Weapon spell. Wild, which is primal with the Walding Word spell to get animals to like not attack you necessarily or take penalties if they do, and your choice of summon animal or plant and fungus. Winter, which is primal again, it's got Clinging Ice, so you can chill your enemy, and Gust of Wind to blow them away.
So over the course of all of these, you're able to get access to any of the 4 spell traditions, and this wasn't always the case in like the plans for the Witch. I know this is one of the things that was on the questionnaire for the playtest of, do people want the Witch to have access to all 4 traditions? Should we add Divine? How are we going to do this?
And it was divisive, but enough people said that they wanted Divine, but not by a lot, and there was still a fair number of people who didn't, but a lot of people wanted at least to have a big variety. It was more of whether to add Divine. There weren't a lot who were like, oh, we'll just stick it only with Occult. So there was a lot of good points made on both sides, but the people who wanted to add Divine were in a significant enough majority. Now there is another rare patron theme that is sometimes you do know who your patron is, and it's Baba Yaga. And that one, Baba Yaga has the ability to cause chicken legs to grow off of an object in it, and then it smacks into your enemies. So it's hilarious. So there's also witch lessons, which allow you to learn particular hexes, no matter what your patron is. Lesson of Dreams, which is going to let you learn the Veil of Dreams hex, so that you can mess around with the the wakefulness of your enemies. Lesson of the Elements gives elemental betrayal to give weaknesses to your enemy. That's great. Lesson of Life Boost, which can get some healing over time to your allies, is excellent. Lesson of Protection is Blood Ward, which can really boost the defenses of your allies. Lesson of Vengeance is Needle of Vengeance, which is a great way to vengefully react to
So
your
a lot of
enemies.
these say, and your familiar learns something. What's the deal with that?
That's just like the patrons. Your familiar learns a regular spell, like Sleep, Burning Hands, Spirit Link, Mage Armor, or Feminine
So when you
Companion.
receive one of these, which you'll probably get by taking an appropriate feat, then your familiar also
It's like
learns
adding a spell to your spellbook if you're a wizard. But the main attraction is you also get the Hex. So greater lessons, Lesson of Mischief gives you Deceiver's Cloak, cloak yourself in illusions, and your familiar learns Mad Monkeys. Lesson of Shadow gives you a Malicious Shadow where you make the enemy's shadow attack them, and your familiar learns Chilling Darkness. Lesson of Snow, you gain Personal Blizzard, where it just puts a little snow cloud over people's head, and your familiar learns Wall of Wind. Major lessons, those are the best ones. Curse of Death, which is just this horrifically dangerous curse that can kill your enemy, and your familiar learns Raise Dead. And Lesson of Renewal, you gain the Restorative Moment Hex, which can quickly restore your allies back to being ready to go, and your familiar learns Field of Life.
As for the feats that the witch has, at first level you can get Cackle that lets you... yes, and you're going to do that. That lets you extend out one of your spells.
As a free action,
Yes.
you can extend out a spell for a focus point. It's just great action economy if you need to sustain a spell. Cauldron, which lets you make oils and potions, and you can just have a bunch of oils and potions. It's very handy.
Counterspell, which you've seen on
you've
some
seen on
other
other
casters
classes.
as well,
Also
as well as
Reach
Reach
and
and
Widen
Widen
spell.
spell. But Wart Witch is a witch one that gives you a Leshy Familiar, because who doesn't want more Leshy?
It gives you a Leshy, and you don't take circumstance penalties to ranged spell attacks or perception checks caused by foliage, and your targeted attacks don't require a flat check to succeed against a target that is concealed only by foliage.
The most important part is that you get a Leshy.
Fair enough. Linda. Fair enough.
At
There's a
second
whole
level-
sidebar here
Yeah.
about the mysteriousness of your patron.
Yeah, for sure, and what that means and how to work that out in your game, whether the player wants to try to craft that or whether that's something to work together with the GM
Yep.
on or things
So
like
Joe
that. Whatever
Dunker
story
says
works out
that
best.
Healing Hex is really useful and that Cackle is great to use with Flaming Sphere. I just love the image of a witch cackling maniacally with glee as like a fiery sphere like burns things. It's just like that seems peak witch to
Yeah,
me.
that's on brand. That's on brand.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe laughing. How about a little fire, Scarecrow?
Yep.
Yep.
At second level, you've got the basic lesson feat, which lets you pick one of those basic lessons. And it's usual for things that give you an additional focus spell. They give you
At least when they're not like poached off another class's list.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes though they don't, but they give you a focus point like most of them do. Cantrip expansion, which gives you more cantrips. Conceal spell, which is a really nice one that Wizard has that is underlooked that we talked about with Wizard being underlooked. And witches have it. Not many classes do. Enhanced familiar, so you could just get a even better familiar with 2 more abilities. Familiar's language, so that you can speak with familiar and other creatures just like the familiar. Living hair, which can give you a unarmed attack that has it's agile, disarm, finesse, trip, and unarmed. It's just so many different
instantly growing and
things.
shrinking any body hair, your hair or eyebrows or beard or mustache, just all kinds of.
Whatever you want.
Yep.
At 4th level, Eldritch Nails
Just
are
imagine
more
like
damaging.
my eyebrows say.
They're more damaging, and they can deliver a hex onto your enemy, but they're not finesse. So you've got to go a strength witch if you're going to do the Eldritch Nails. But it's very, very interesting potential. There aren't a lot of hexes that you can actually deliver with them, but it can be pretty cool. Improved familiar is you find it easy to attract a more powerful familiar, and that lets the required number of abilities go down by 2 for improved special specific familiar.
And Joe points out in chat, Secrets of Magic has a bunch of hair augments as well.
Does it? Or were those in like the back matter of Ruby Phoenix?
I don't know.
Okay, I don't know either. Rites of Convocation lets you choose a summon spell that you can spend 10 minutes switching around for. Then Greater Lesson is going to give you that Greater Lesson that we talked about before.
Steady spellcasting for making it harder for people to disrupt
pretty
you.
standard. Witch's Charge, where you form a magical link with a creature and you kind of know how they're doing And then you can cast spells on them that are usually touch from 30 feet away. Very, very handy spell or ability to have. You know if you're a witch who has healing, who's the person who always needs your healing.
Yep.
You know. Incredible Familiar. Your Familiar has even more base abilities. My goodness, once you have all of those Familiar feats, including Improved Familiar, you can get the most expensive Familiars without spending any of your witch extra abilities. So you can throw those on top of that.
Merc Sight, non-magical fog, mist, rain, snow, all those kinds of things. You just see through them as if there was nothing there.
Witch's Bottle is where you kind of make a potion full of a hex, possibly with a cackle, and then release it later. Major Lesson gives those really strong lessons, like the one about killing them with a Death Curse. Quicken Casting, very powerful, but also only once per day, so when you want to go Nova, you cast 2 spells. Temporary Potions that just flat out gives you a bunch of potions each day. Very, very good.
Witch's Communion, if you want to have multiple people that you're watching over at once with your protection.
Why not? I mean, I might want to do that if I have a Witch's Charge. Then Familiar's Eyes, where you can spend an action, see through your Familiar. Hex Focus, where is kind of a standard one for a lot of casters, where you get 2 focus back each time on refocusing, because normally you can only get 1 back, so if you've spent more than 1 since your last 10 minutes, you're going to go down on your net Nova potential for the day. Not with Hex Focus. Reflect Spell.
When you're counterspelling, and if you want to bounce it back at the original caster.
I think Wizards have that too, but not that many. Or maybe Sorcerer. But
somebody else does it, I don't remember.
Not that many classes have it. Rites of Transfiguration, where your Familiar learns Baleful Polymorph and you can switch into it. That's a really important one, because otherwise some of the traditions of witches do not have the ability to turn you into a frog. And with this feat, they always have the ability to turn you into a frog.
It was critical that witches always be able to turn people into a frog.
It's very important that they be able to turn you into a frog, Linda.
Naturally.
Effortless Concentration, a very standard one where you can free action when your turn begins, sustain a spell. If you have that and Cackle, you can sustain all the spells. Siphon Power is a great one where once per day, when you haven't acted yet on your turn, you cast 1 spell your Familiar knows, granted by your patron's theme or lessons, without spending a spell slot to do so. It can't be your highest level spell. Hex Wellspring is an 18th level for 3 focus points version of the other one we were talking about with 2 focus points before. Split Hex is an 18th level Meta Magic where you cast a Hex that you reduce its levels by 2 for purpose of heightening it, and then hit 2 targets with it, which is pretty cool. And then the 20th level, there's always a line that gives you another 10th level slot, but there's also Hex Master.
Lets you cast more than 1 hex per turn. When you sustain hexes with Cackle, you get sustain a spell for all your hexes.
Which, if you have a lot of hexes, could potentially be a lot that you're sustaining with Cackle.
Yes.
And then now the problem is obviously running out of focus points to cast all of them and then use Cackle. But if you can figure out your way around that, it could be a lot.
You're level 20. You probably got something.
Witch's Hut is like the prestige one though, in terms of not prestige class, but just the okay, sure, yeah, 10th level spell, sure, millions of hexes all at once. But don't you want to have this giant hut that follows you around and just is constantly moving or hiding and locking itself up.
Staying on guard using your perception modifier at all times.
Yep, that's right.
Running around on its chicken legs or whatever else it's got going on.
Yep. It's a giant hut. So
classic theme in there.
That is what we've got in terms of the witch's options. So there's also, of course, the witch archetype. It's actually unique among casting archetypes because of the fact that it gives you a familiar with 1 but not 2 abilities while giving you fewer cantrips than other classes get.
Because the familiar is so central to the idea of the witch.
Yep. So you get 1 fewer cantrip, but you also get half of a familiar and half of the cantrips. And if you manage to take basic witch spellcasting, it also or not spellcasting, basic witchcraft, the one that gives you a witch feat, it also gives your familiar its second ability for free. So in essence, if you're willing to take basic witchcraft and you know that you're doing that for sure, you actually get not 2 halves of a feat, but 1.5 of the feats for Witch
Yes.
Dedication given back to you. It has all the basic advanced and expert master spellcasting that you expect, plus basic and advanced witchcraft for witch feats, Patron's Breath, the breath feat to get more spells per day that you expect, and that's what it has.
Similar to what we said for, in terms of who this is good for, similar to what we said for a lot of other classes that have, like Sorcerer, where it's like, well, this could let you cast off any tradition. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of what kinds of characters this would be good for.
Absolutely. So, for example, if you are a wizard going into, like, Rune Witch, then you not only are casting with Intelligence, which is the same capability score, but you're casting off Arcane, and you have a really high DC. So there's that. You can get more spells that are very high DC, but they're like your other spells. So you could also choose to be a Divine Witch, which still uses your Intelligence. The DC is not the greatest, maybe, but it's up there, right? It's only going to be 2 worse than your actual wizard spells, because it still uses your Intelligence. And you get spells off of a different list than Arcane, a very different list than Arcane. So a wizard could be happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, alchemists can find any kind of spell that can sort of help them out as an intelligence-based class. Investigators like witches in terms of what they can take. Really, any time that you know you're going to have the intelligence or you're willing to take the intelligence, it's a good archetype for you to take. So Analog Caveman talks about the familiar not being something that the player may not be invested in first, but then could potentially get invested in a lot based on the story and how things happen. And that just seems very cool to me. I like that. So
Familiars have a way of becoming the mascot.
that's true. Like, if you've ever seen our Skull and Shackles, Linda's Adventure Skull and Shackles, Pontus the Tideful Dragon familiar was definitely Linda's favorite character as the GM out of all of the characters. She plays favorites, and her favorite was the familiar, one of the familiars.
That's true. But tiny, cute creatures, I've got some bias for them.
Hold on, Linda. Pontus was the most powerful dragon
for his size.
For his weight class.
That's true.
So
That's true.
if you take his power level and divide it by volume, you'll find that it was higher than any other dragon. So, also in terms of what archetypes are good for Witch, well, obviously, in the exact flip side, taking Wizard Dedication can be handy for Witch to pick up some Arcane spells if you don't have them, or more Arcane spells if you want to do that all Arcane, super high DC combination. Another thing that you might consider doing with Witch is taking archetypes that give you something good that you want to sustain, or taking archetypes that give you actions that you know that you're going to be able to spend even though you're using sustained spells, because you can use Cackle as a sort of a way to ease yourself into that action economy. You can also take archetypes that synergize with the fact that you have a really solid familiar from Witch. So you don't really need familiar master archetype, but you can use the fact that you have a familiar to pick an archetype that works well with someone who already has a familiar without having to take both familiar master and the other archetype.
For sure, for sure.
So there's a lot, and obviously if you want to be the Strength Witch who's like putting death curses on people with nails, I think death curse applies to nails. There aren't a whole lot that do. But if you do, you might want to take like Sentinel so that you can have heavy armor too on your Strength Witch, and you just go in there and you've got these iron nails and this iron armor, and you go in and you like lay down the hex beat down on your enemies.
Pretty cool.
And Joe mentions the Coal Sprite from Spirited Away, who I think Joe had mentioned in a previous episode, so I think I remember that one.
Very cute.
Yep. There's a lot of cool things you can do with your familiar
Magus,
friends.
yeah.
Magus is the new in class, so yeah, that's absolutely
Well, we
true.
talking about the Magus
No,
too?
but Magus is a great person to take the Witch archetype, because it can give you more spells and you don't have a huge number of them. And so it's a very good choice for a Magus to take. Now, Magus has a lot of really good Magus feats too, but certainly Witch is a solid one for Magus. And Spell Strike from the Magus archetype can be good potentially for someone who's like a scrapper, nails, strength Witch who's going in there with Sentinel and Magus multi-class and Spell Striking sometimes, because you could do one Spell Strike and then you could throw a Hex onto your nails with the Hex Nails ability, and so you're just throwing a bunch of stuff onto people.
You just keep smacking them with all your spells and your attacks, and people,
Yeah.
your opponents are just like, why?
I mean, I think not all at the same time, although I'll have to check the exact wording on Eldritch Nails. So, yeah, it should... It's actually a... yeah, it's probably not... It's not going to work directly with Spell Strike, but since you only have one Spell Strike per 10-minute rest, essentially, you can do the Spell Strike, and you can deliver the hexes on your nails.
Yes.
So you've got
a lot of different options.
A lot of ways to do attacks that are going to put spells out on people if you did that.
For sure, for sure.
Yep. So yeah, that's where we're at in terms of the Witch and the Witch archetypes.
So shall we say goodbye to YouTube?
Bye, YouTube.
Bye.
See you next time.